Welcome to MacGyver is looking at how we can use SQL to query and update data, as well as using data validation and performing what-if statements. We're going to start with the SQL. And for this process, we're going to be using Microsoft Access. Now before we get started, we just have to take a quick look at the database and how it's been set up in order for us to manipulate the data within and do some queries and searches. Initially, I've located my database in a convenient place, in this case on the desktop. And I'm going to open up Microsoft Access and open that specific file on the desktop. When I get there, I'm presented with the following information. And it's important that initially we have a quick look at Access to how the tables and the forms and the relationships are built for queries to be run. First of all, I've created two tables. Table 1 has a given ID of 10 different people. It's then got a first name, a last name, a particular height, a crime, and a release date, as well as if the prisoner is behaving or not. Now this is done quite simply. We can make a new table at any point by going to the Create button within the ribbon and clicking on the table. And we can add a name for a particular field. So I could have, for example, short text, where I want to put some wording in. Or I could add numerical data fields with specific numbers, dates and times, yes/no statements. A couple of examples here though. I am in my prison information sheet using decimal places for the height, and I just need to check if I was to do that. Initially, if I wanted to put in a height of say 1.8 meters, I'll find that I automatically get it rounded. I can overcome that by selecting the column, going to the design mode and changing the height from a long integer to something such as a double. Going back into my datasheet view and saving it, I'll notice that I can now overwrite. And so that's what table 1 has had pre-populated. Some names, heights, some crimes, some release dates. So at this stage, I'm going to remove the new table that I've just shown, as we're not going to need it for this task. I've also produced a second table, because we're going to look at how we can take information from different sources and query some results from within. In this case, I've simply had 10 individuals placed within with a given ID number and the prison they're in. Now actually this ID number is the same as we find in table 1. So for example, prisoner number 1, Paul Jury, is also here ID number 1, and Paul Jury is in the prison Wormwood Scrubs. Now we're going to automate this process where we link the two, and that's known as relationships, which I'll talk about in a minute. Finally, I've created a form within Access. Now a form allows easy inputting of data, and you'll notice currently it's populated with 10 records. These are the 10 records in table number 1. I could go to my form, I could go right to the end, and I could add a new person. This form makes it quite easy for individuals to fill in. I can close that down after saving it. And if I go back to table 1 and refresh, my new person will be placed in. In this scenario, I don't actually want them to be there, so I'm going to delete them out. So this is a basic layout that I've got for my database. Two tables with different information, but they link to each other within the ID, and a form that allows easy access for someone to input. Now finally, amongst these two parts, I've created a relationship. Let's take a look at it. If we go to Database Tools, we can click on the Relationships button. And you'll notice the two tables have a relationship. I can edit relationships and I can create a new one. I want to link these two tables. My left table name is Table 1. My right table name is Table 2. And I'm going to inform the database that my left column name is ID number. This specific number is also found in my other table. So for example, prisoner number 1 has some information in table 1, and prisoner number 1 also has some information in table 2. I haven't duplicated the data, so in table 1 I've got prisoner number 1's name and the crime that they committed. I haven't copied the name and the crime they committed in table 2, the prison that they're in. So the ID number is absolutely vital here. Prisoner number 1 has information in both tables, and I must make sure that my ID numbers always remain the same when adding or editing my databases. I can now look at how I can actually begin to use the database to run queries. In essence, we need to think of queries as a sophisticated find and search. We're going to be pulling information from different sources, organising, and bringing out some results. Let's take a look at the criteria that we can use to find this from either single sources or multiple criteria. How we can look for certain fields. Moving on, how we can use multiple tables, as in this example. And then how we can use commands to either have them ascending, descending, or even within specific criteria range. The first thing we want to do at this point then is to create a query. And we're going to go to the query design. Initially, I only want to find information from one table. So I'm going to double click on table 1 and press close. This will give me all the information that I've got in the database within table 1. I think I'd like the first name of a prisoner. I think I'd like the crime that they did. And finally, I want to know if they're behaving or not. So clicking on each of those particular fields, you'll notice they're placed within the field part of the sheet. Now at any point, I can look at what my query is going to bring up. In the View button, top left, I can change from Design View to Database View. It's now showing me all the names of the individuals, all the crimes that they did, and if they're behaving or not. I can actually look at the SQL specifically if I wanted to, which is informing me exactly what it's bringing out. Now going back to the design view, I might decide that actually I want to sort a particular field. I might want the first name to be sorted upon. So I can choose ascending. Going back into my datasheet view, I'll now notice that they've been sorted by first name. And of course, I've got the ability to change that from ascending to descending. And I can do that on any particular field that I've required. I could also choose some specific criteria. So I could say that actually, in the criteria options, I only want to see the people that are behaving. So I can type the word yes, because in this field, it was a yes/no statement. And going into my datasheet view, I can see these particular prisoners are behaving. If I changed that to no, I can now see these particular criminals are not behaving. And I can vary that particular criteria on all sorts of specifics. So I could look for all the Adams, and perhaps I could look for all of the Marks. And here are the Adams, and here are the Marks. So this is how I can use a query to find given information. Now I might find that actually on top of this, I want to include the information. So let's take a look. I'm going to close that query part down. And I'm now going to create, using the query design, a new query. I'm going to have information from table 1 and table 2. Again, I think I'd like the first name. I think I'd like the crime. I think at that point, I'd also like to find out what prison they're in before I look at if they're behaving or not. And again, I can have different data sorts. So I might decide that this time I'd like all the prisons to be sorted ascendingly. Looking at the datasheet view, I've now got my 10 individuals with the 10 crimes, both from table 1, and if they're behaving from table 1, but it's also included from table 2 the prison they're in. And remember, that's been linked based on the ID number and the relationship that I set up previously. Now going into my database, I can again sort and query or even look for specific criteria. I might look at all prisoners who are not behaving, and now it would tell me of those not behaving what prisons they happen to be in. So that's the basics to Microsoft Access and how databases can be used for selecting and updating commands, using single and multiple criteria, selecting certain fields, and using queries both ascendingly and descendingly.